Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. On behalf of the Open Civic Foundation, Object Management Group, and the Global City Teams Challenge, I'd like to welcome you to the Digital Infrastructure Forum. The forum addresses the top data and information technology issues challenging government today. My name is Heather Crondall. I am a co-CEO and chief architect at the Open Civic Foundation, and I'll be your host for the next 2 hours. I'd also like to introduce my co-host, Heidi Lindorfer. Heidi is also a co-CEO at the Open Civic Foundation and head of our Data Analytics and Community Improvement Program. Welcome, Heidi. As we move through the presentations, you'll want to be aware of some important platform features. On the bottom right of your screen, you'll find a Q&A button. Please enter your questions as we go along. Heidi and our panelists will provide answers to your questions as they're presented. For those of you watching the video of the forum after the event, you can access the Q&A from the location on the screen now. So why are we here today? We're here to join these three very innovative organizations in launching a collaborative national and global effort to further develop the Open Civic Architectural Framework and digital ecosystem. This collaboration is going to establish the digital infrastructure we need to provide modern government and civic services to our communities and to our constituents. Nationally and across the globe, government organizations at every level, federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, we're all struggling to independently develop solutions for our outdated digital infrastructure. Across the board, we're facing issues like unstandardized and inaccessible data, technology bloat, increased security concerns, systems integration failures, proprietary lock-in, lack of data privacy, maintenance versus modernization, unfocused IT and data governance, and minimal opportunity for civic engagement. I'd like to take a moment here to go back and emphasize the word collaborative. The digital infrastructure issues we face today cannot be solved by siloed strategies under an agency, within a department, under a division, under a program, within an office. If we look back at our national and international infrastructure history, we see projects like our interstate transportation infrastructure. This infrastructure was developed through collaborative planning and execution across government agencies and private sector partners. Our public digital infrastructure must be developed in the same way if we want to ensure successful implementation and sustainability. And the cornerstone to this collaboration will be through the further development and implementation of Open Civic standards for digital infrastructure. Our speakers today are advisors to the Open Civic Foundation, as well as the Open Civic Standards development process under the Object Management Group. Each speaker will address a part of this effort within their area of expertise. Our first presentation focuses on government's use of enterprise architecture to provide improved civic outcomes. I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Pallab Saha and Mr. Hani Iskander. Dr. Saha is the chief architect at the Open Group and president of the Association of Enterprise Architecture in India. Dr. Saha has been identified as a thought leader by IBM Smart City Connect and featured by Forbes magazine. A senior lead expert in enterprise architecture and a visiting professor of digital architecture at the Indian Institute of Management, Dr. Saha advises various ministries and states on matters pertaining to government-wide architecture initiatives. I'm also very excited to introduce Mr. Hani Iskander. Mr. Iskander is the Digital Services Senior Coordinator at the Digital Society Division of the Telecommunication Development Bureau of the International Telecommunications Union. Mr. Iskander is currently involved in providing assistance to several developing countries by advising on digital applications and service strategies and policies. He assists in implementing technical cooperation projects in areas of digital health, agriculture, governance, and education. Welcome, Pallab and Hani.
That is consistent with the theme of today's webinar. And there are a few other things which are important. So what we have done here as a group, me and Hani, we have been talking about this and working on this for multiple months now. So we have come together and created a graphical view of what a process looks like, because this is almost like kind of a guidance for the countries that we are looking at. So later on in one of the slides, I will show you what are the attributes of countries having low resources. But If you look at the UN ecosystem, there are about 190 plus countries, and in our assessment, there are at least 120 plus countries who fit into this, bucket of countries with low resources. So that is the kind of scale that we are talking. And therefore, what we have done in this graphic, so to speak, is that we have created a simple 4-stage process of digital governance. So as you can see, the 4 stages, and there are a few sub steps there. My intent here is not to go into the sub steps. I've already shared the slide with Heather. I'm sure it will be shared with all of you. So the first step is more of understanding the context and situation. Second one is defining the vision for the future. Third one is actually doing the digital government transformation, defining a strategy, coming up with a roadmap, and data is a big box there. You can see right there on the right of the picture, and then it goes into the implementation. But the important point for this picture, for this graphic, is that we are basing our approach of digital government architecture from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because we believe that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, with its 17 goals and 160 indicators, provides an excellent framework, excellent performance framework for countries to kind of direct their digital government initiatives towards development program, which is something that the countries are looking for. So the idea here is not to use digital technologies for the sake of doing digital technologies, but to improve the development outcomes for the countries. And that's the reason why we have based this on the SDG, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, taking this forward, therefore, we have identified a few key areas that are important from an architectural perspective. My intent is not to go through all of these 10 areas, but you can see some of the key areas include strategic thinking, which is the big picture thinking, delivery of digital platforms and ecosystems. Leadership and governance, of course, is a key, showstopper. The need for administrative reforms and change management is important. The softer areas like culture is important. Data, you can again see there, security, privacy, and resilience is, of course, it's an absolute mandatory issue today, and supported by legislation and regulatory changes, which are important to ensure that the countries are able to adopt digital technologies, not just for the sake of technology per se, but to be able to improve their development outcomes, so to speak. Now, as I said in one of my statements earlier, so what we have done here in this slide is we have listed out the key characteristics and the key challenges that we see in countries with low resources. Now, typically these 120 odd countries, you will see some or all of these characteristics, and this is something we as a community, whatever we do in this collaborative effort, we need to be able to factor these challenges, and therefore whatever frameworks and the standards and the best practices we come up with should be able to address some of these challenges. Now, these challenges include aspects like how service delivery is fragmented, the outcomes are inconsistent, there's a limited use of standards, things are not scaled. So for instance, if one ministry or one department has a good solution, that good learning process does not get propagated to other ministries and other departments. There are weak regulations, there is inconsistent ICT infrastructure, right? I'm sure one of the speakers is going to address that in some way. There tends to be multiple initiatives with very little ability to internalize or institutionalize those initiatives. Of course, there are social and cultural barriers. There are certain areas where you couldn't even introduce a digital service because of maybe certain cultural barriers or that exist. Sometimes it could even be religious barriers that may exist in certain countries. So these are some of the key areas. In fact, point number 9 is something we have personally experienced, where we have seen that even though the governments at a higher level, at an upper level, are willing to introduce digital services, sometimes the competency level of the rank and file staff within the government is so low that it does not therefore translate itself into any usable and relevant digital service for citizens. Because if the government officials, for instance, are not adept at using digital technologies, they are not going to be able to convince the people, for instance, to use that digital technology. So this, I think, in a nutshell, presents the context that we are trying to address. This is almost like presenting the entire landscape. And we have therefore come up with an approach, a framework and an approach, which I will now let Hani to elaborate in the next couple of slides. Hani, the floor is all yours now.
Okay, thank you very much, Palab, and thanks, Hazar, for the kind invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here and discuss this very important topic of digital infrastructure, because we've been really thinking about it very seriously, particularly in the context of the countries with limited resources, because the whole idea is that if we are capable of powering governments with the right digital infrastructure in a way that this digital infrastructure is reusable across different government departments and agencies, etc., then we are going to really help countries moving forward with relatively limited investments and also in an accelerated manner. And this is, by the way, not at all what is going on currently when it comes to digital investment, in particularly in countries with low resource settings, where you see a lot of duplication, and this concept of investing in a common digital infrastructure is almost non-existent. Now, fortunately, there is a raised understanding about this concept of digital public infrastructure, and many countries and many donors are even trying to promote the concept. But the question that we asked ourselves a few years back, what are the capabilities that you would expect to see or to have or to find in the context of those low resource settings? No, can you go to the previous slide? Yes.
Yeah.
So the approach that we took is to say, let's really start having a kind of an outcome-based approach. Meaning, let's see first what kind of outcomes we'd like to see. And of course, we used the Sustainable Development Goals, as Palab mentioned, as our guiding framework, because I think there is a consensus globally that this is the right way of looking at outcomes that are desirable, particularly in those contexts. So what we've done is that we try to look at different sectors. So we took three main sectors: agriculture, health, and education, because as we know, those are extremely important sectors in those countries. And then we started to look at what are the high impact use cases, what are the most common type of use cases that we would see in those countries that are related to those types of SDGs, and that would have direct relationship or impact on some of the SDG targets, like, for example, maternal child health. What are the common use cases that we can see in maternal child health? Like, for example, mother and child tracking systems and postnatal care and the like. And we try to do this exercise in different sectors to try to come up with a number of use cases that we know that are high priorities and are most common, and most countries would need to enable those types of use cases. Then the question comes is, how can we enable possibly all those use cases with the same digital public infrastructure? And from the surface, when you look at those use cases, you can see that they are very, very, very different. They are in very different sectors, and the context is different, etc. But when you go one step further and try to analyze on the business level, on the process level, we figured out that while in those use cases you are doing different things and giving them different names, but in terms of business processes, if you decompose complex business process into more elementary business processes, which we call workflows, you will end up having a small set of workflows or common business processes that are very common. Like, for example, client communication, that in most of those use cases, you need to have an interactive communication with your citizen. One way, two way, one to many, many to many, etc. So this is a business process that is very common regardless of the type of use cases. And then we managed to reach out the below technology capabilities. And then we came up with what we call building blocks of technologies or capabilities that are very modular, very well scoped, and we figured out that there are a kind of a limited number of capabilities, like, for example, digital identity, digital payments, registration, security, e-marketplaces, e-learning, etc. So we have identified examples like 23 digital building block that constitute some sort of capabilities that are very much common. And the whole idea, if we manage to make those capabilities as available, but in a way that they are interoperable and they are secure by design, and they constitute what you can call like a platform, a digital government or a digital public service platform, then this will help significantly to reduce significantly the amount of money and time that will be required to to deliver the services. Because instead of building a service which is happening now in a monolithic manner where you build everything and plug it together, then you don't need to do that. You move to service-oriented architecture, which is, as we saw in most of the countries that we visited, this is not a common practice. That's why we really feel that enterprise architecture is critical, not only for because it's a buzzword, because really it's without adopting those types of approaches, you will never be able to to reach the scale with the limited resources that are available in those countries. So next slide, please. So I mean, this what we have been seeing is a radical, more foundational mindset shift from approaching digital investment. Instead of approaching the digital investment, in a very monolithic manner, very siloed, very quick to target type of things, without having a long-term view, and also very much not adopting this whole of government approach, you really need to change a lot of things in order for that to happen. So this diagram is just gives a kind of the way we are trying to explain it to governments and to countries when it comes to identifying, let them identify what are the kind of capabilities that they would like to have in their country. And we take, for example, a use case for remote consultation when it comes to healthcare, and we take step by step and say, okay, for this particular step in the user journey, here are some of the possible reusable type of capabilities that you will see that they are coming back and back and back again, and there is no point of reinvesting several times. And we really try to explain, and when they see these types of diagrams, they understand the importance of adopting this once only principle. To say, why would you want to develop those types of capabilities more than one time? But in order to achieve that, this is the kind of mindset shift and culture shift and governance that shift that needs to happen, because usually and traditionally you don't think of user journeys end to end like that. You usually think about it about small pieces of solutions, small pieces of moments, and you don't see the whole picture, and you don't do it within one sector, let alone do it across different sectors. So when we have presented the results, and by the way, I'm going to paste in the link the report that we published a couple of years ago that is called the SDG Digital Investment Framework, that describes this very simple kind of common sense approach that unfortunately is not really a common sense when it comes to real life. I think this is the type of, and that's why we are really very much focusing on pushing the capabilities of enterprise architecture to really make sure that countries start to adopt architectural approaches. But when we talk about countries with limited resources, we'd like them to adopt the architectural approaches that are very much fit for purpose and very much kind of geared towards not also over investing, but investing for fit for purpose type of architecture, if I can call it like that. So once we have identified those building blocks, I think that the immediate next question is, those building blocks should not operate as silos, because then you go back to the same problem again, is how you create some sort of an interoperability framework that makes all those different small bits and pieces work seamlessly as a whole, adopting the right standards. And this is another effort that we are doing now with a number of partners from Estonia and Germany, GIZ, and the Digital Impact Alliance, with a lot of other partners, that we are trying to build what we call a government tech stack, a government technology stack, which is a kind of an overarching framework that showcase how all those different bits and pieces can come together. What are the interfaces, open APIs, what kind of information mediation you can use to facilitate the information flow, what are the minimum functionalities. And here we are really very focusing on to adopt a minimalistic approach to build an MVP, a minimum viable product or platform, in our case, to make sure that we can showcase to countries that, listen, I mean, this is how you build up a kind of a government, a whole of government platform which will be your digital public infrastructure, which is really the foundation for the future, because once you have that, you can build endless number of use cases and services without having to reinvent the wheel each time. Next slide. So it's important also to government to see what's in it for me. And that's why it's very important that we explain the impact on the governance. And actually, though this comes at the end slide, it should be the first one, because this is what you would like to showcase, all those technology things. Maybe they are not so important or even exciting for the governance guys, but if we explain to them that, by having this common digital infrastructure, you will be able to accelerate the digitalization for the whole economy, for your whole government, for your whole society, actually. And you're gonna be able to, make services available, accessible in a universal manner. And this, for countries with low resource settings, this is a game changer. I mean, the impact I would see is probably much more impactful than in developed countries, where developed countries, even if you go to the government office, you can still get a decent type of service. But in many countries, going to the government office sometimes is already a challenge because it's very far, and then going and take the service might take ages. So this would have significant transformational impact on the life of citizens. Blind type of decision making could be addressed, because now we having this interoperability layer can really help you to, towards moving towards data aggregation, data insights, and analytics, and all those kind of things, moving into one government, one citizen type of approach, and also making sure that you don't reinvent the wheel and don't making better cost efficiencies of your investments. And slightly and gradually your governments become even more proactive. They can even start to anticipate things before happening, because they have the information and they have put in place the right type of approaches. So anyway, I mean, this is in a nutshell how we approached it, particularly in the low resource settings. But as Palab mentioned, I think this approach is still probably very valid for other types of contexts. And again, I think it's all about building capacities, because if at different levels, from decision makers to to kind of even the workforce, the government workforce, I mean, adopting those types of cultural mindset shifts will be very difficult. So that's why, I mean, that's why we are investing also heavily in the capacity development to make sure that those architecture approaches become democratized. I think this is the word that everyone needs to talk about architecture without being expert in architecture. But I think having presented in a very simple and almost a common sense Lego type of approach like that, even a kid probably, hopefully, can understand it. Anyway, so we'll stop here, and I'm happy that we have respected the time frame as well. And back to you, Heather.
Next, I'd like to introduce Catalin Barfey Walcott. Catalin is responsible for software and systems innovation architecture in Intel's Emerging Growth Initiatives organization. Her focus is on the development of self-forming, self-aware, and responsive infrastructure, as well as on-demand platform technologies. She was awarded the Top 50 Smarter City Global Influencers Award for 2019. Welcome, Caddy.
What I would like to talk to you today about is something near and dear to my heart, and something that I've been working on for about 5-6 years so far. It's called ambient science, and I'm looking to evolve to a concept of something that we call an ambient world. So one of the things that was very wonderful in the previous presentation is, and it's very resonant with the concepts that we are talking about in ambient, is this concept of democracy, the concepts of citizenship. And I would like to add to that via this concept of ambient, the elements of representation. So why do we even talk about ambient? Because there is a distinct separation today between what we see in the physical world and what we see in the cyber world. And there is a very poor interchange and intersection between the two. It requires a significant amount of knowledge. It requires a language. It requires an ontology and a syntax in order for very, very smart computer savvy people to interact with the cyberspace. And even those of us who have been in this industry for 30 plus years, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to age myself. But you know, even us who have been in this space for many, many years, we have to keep up with the technology. We have to keep up with the interfaces, with the interchanges, with the languages for us to be able to manage what's happening on the cyber side, what happens on the internet, what happens to our data, how is our data managed, how is our data exchanged, how is our data transported. And even with the knowledge that we have, I have to say it's very, very difficult for us to get our arm around our data. And it's very difficult for us to trace our data, for us to maintain knowledge of its location, where it's stored, how it's used, who is using it. It's very difficult for us to be able to keep track of the provenance, keep track of the chain of custody. So the concepts around ambient are really beginning to tap into those critical requirements for us to be represented in the cyber physical space in an equal fashion, both from legal and legislative and from transactional space, which is what the area that I'm going to be really diving into today, in the same fashion as you would be expecting in the physical world. So let me begin by looking at what is something that you may be familiar with, so that we can kind of set the stage. Something that you may be looking at as part of digital twins, and what is the difference between a digital twin and an ambient twin. So if we go, roll back maybe about 20 years, digital twins, which are the representation of a physical object and system, was really created initially by NASA and then later on developed by GE in order to take real world data and representation of a physical thing and provide a inventory like representation in cyberspace. And the whole purpose of that was that if you could read the information about this physical item in a digital representation, you should have an equivalence and you should be able to identify it in a physical world, even if you have never seen it before. And so, and go the other way as well. So if you see something physically, you should be able to identify that in digitally or in the cyberspace. There's a connection between those two things. So essentially, it was a digital model of an industrial asset. Now, if we take this into today's IT and today's computing environment, what we don't see is that there is no digital representation of a human that is all-encompassing. we can talk about different industry verticals. We can talk about healthcare. We can talk about, government. And there are representations of people within the digital assets and the data assets that are within these different verticals, but they're not all encompassing, and that representation is not validated. And that representation of that data doesn't actually reconnect to the physical person, and it's not alive to manage the changes in that physical person to be represented in the digital side. So the purpose of an Nbn twin is to actually create a digital representative and a digital representation of that human being for the purpose of really describing the entirety of that individual. But even going beyond that, in order to provide the representation so that we can actually attach the contracts, the rules and terms and conditions that that individual would like to have on their data, and provide the facilities and capabilities so that the data and that representation can occur in cyber physical space. So how do we do that? We do that through the digital agent, which is actually enabling a trusted transactional framework to manage the data, as well as something that we call the Nbn object and the transaction and the life cycle. So actually create the transactional and contractual framework prior to the data creation, the data acquisition, and the data management, so that those contracts can apply to the data prior to and during the life cycle of that data end to end. It also provides guardianship so that you can actually have the representation of a knowledgeable entity on the cyberspace who can represent you and represent the transaction, represent the legal and the contractual framework on the data, and actually manage that life cycle. And this is done through a service capability, which is actually ensuring the adherence of the contract terms and conditions. It requires the instrumentation of that data, of those contracts on the data prior to the data creation, but then it managing that data through its life cycle. Now, one of the other elements of an Nbn twin that's really interesting is that it's creating the ability to equalize the relationship at the cyber level between human, legal, and physical entities. Because as each one of these have an ambient representative, now the negotiation for a contract of a transaction can be facilitated by the equivalence, by the universal representation between, I'm going to pick a corporation, my phone is right in front of me, my Apple corporate transaction and my human individual transaction. I have the ability to create a relationship for the contract negotiation on my data between myself and a corporation such as Apple. So why Nbn twins? Because we have three things that we need to deal with. We need to deal with the lack of control of data ownership and privacy. So we need to have a new environment that's providing an immersive experience that does not require for an individual to have the PhD in computer science to really understand APIs and pub/sub interfaces, for them to understand the ontology and the syntax of data, of metadata. We want to make sure that they have the ability to manage their environment and still provide the data set in their language to the contract negotiation, the terms and conditions, the rules, the regulations that they want to infer on their data, and communicate that in a way that their ambient representative can translate it into the cyber side representation and actually adhere to or manage the adherence to that contract terms and condition and manage the life cycle. So we don't need to have, as normal, regular human beings, the complex underlying computing knowledge in order to enable this interaction. So we also need to simplify the environment, and we do that through objects because we want to make sure that we can represent things within the ambient environment by describing not just their physical capabilities like the digital twins do, but also their interactions and capabilities. So these are adding additional dimensions on the data that is actually describing that need and that want and that request, like we have on the physical world. We have the ability to actually translate that through objects, ambient objects, into the cyber physical world. And then lastly, I think this is something that is part of the undertone of this conversation, is enabling equality and interoperability. So our vision is to create an ambient society that is creating this class of citizenship through objects and through implementation that allows data to become a first-class citizen. And that first-class citizenship is represented according to the needs and wants of that human entity, of that legal entity, or that physical entity. So let's take a look at the evolution of digital marketplace, because we are not quite there yet. So if you look back a little bit and you look at the PCs and the internet, that's where we really started in trying to develop to the services marketplace. So when we talk about SOA and we're looking at WSDL and the languages that actually enable SOA, those are constructs that really talk about the fundamental elements of services. But then we have to apply them into the future, because those services have to be very responsive. They have to be very timely. There is something called data gravity. So as you're moving up through the market space, through the cloud and IoT, you're starting to deal with, well, where is that data? How long does it take for me to get that data? So you're looking at the rate of transaction, you're looking at timeliness, you're looking at throughput. And you want to make sure that you have the ability to get that knowledge and that extraction through ambient and through AI, and then get to ambient in order to move from services all the way through experiences with the right content. Now, if you're looking at the other side on the data intelligence, you also need to be able to move some more from very basic structured and unstructured data all the way through connected, autonomous, and trustworthy and truthful data intelligence that is actually representing the actual individual, the actual ambient structure of that physical entity in the physical world. And most importantly, these experiences and the data have to be connected through a transaction. There has to be a relationship that is instrumented in a way that the end-to-end life cycle of that data can be managed actively and actually, so that the contract is not evaluated when the contract terms and conditions have been bridged or they are no longer upheld, and through courts and long processes, manage and either remunerate or penalize somebody for breaching that contract. Those contracts, through an active managed transaction, need to be evaluated in situ while that contract is live. And you need to have the representation through an Nbn twin in order to do so. So when we are looking at the ambient world, we are essentially connecting the physical world and the cyber world with the objects and data in order to create this ambient world that is taking these traditional and digital business models and allowing us to create a digital marketplace. So the focus of the ambient world is the data citizenship and the data ownership and data management, but it's also looking at the monetization of that data. So if we're looking at this from my own personal goal, I would love to see a universal basic income come out of the ability that there is value to that data, and turn that and give that back through the individual and give them the ability through their Nbn twin in order to be able to access that value. So when we are connecting, this is kind of the end of the presentation. What we are looking at is actually creating a similar environment between the physical world and the cyber world through representation. And we can apply this to different industries, different sectors, different industry verticals, but it requires us to do the due diligence in instrumentation, in due diligence in creating the data and the metadata, in creating the systems, the dial tone, the services that are needed in order for the transactions to be negotiated prior to the data actually being generated, because the contracts, the regulations, the rules have to be applied to the data, and the negotiation between entities have to occur prior to the data that's being created. Because if you apply a contract to data that was already created and it's already in situ, then that contract begins after that physical value is already there. So we want to make sure that we do this in the right order. And the purpose and the work behind the ambient world and ambient science is to figure out the hard and soft government legislation, legal frameworks, and all of the other technical aspects underneath in order to drive the development of these capabilities and establish the relationship between physical and cyber. So in closing, Ambient is focusing on creating a new environment to provide a consistent and trusted immersive experience, but really without this complex underlying computing knowledge, this complex interfaces of interchanges of data models and semantics and all of these things that keep many of the computer scientists and engineers awake at night, but really provide the regular citizen the ability to have an interaction with the proper representation and the proper management, but without them having to really understand the complexity. So ambient is a paradigm shift because it's introducing the need to begin the contract to enable the services so that the interaction can be negotiated prior to data creation. So with that, I would like to thank you for the time, and if there are any questions, I would love to answer.
Next, I'd like to introduce Jean Rice. Jean is a telecommunications expert and advisor who works with federal agencies, tribal, local, and state governments, industry, universities, and nonprofits on smart cities and community projects, and provides technical assistance to support the widespread deployment of broadband infrastructure. Jean focuses on the development of cutting-edge cross-sector smart city and broadband projects and collaborations, and leads the National Telecommunication Association's partnership with the National Institute of Standard and Technology's Global Cities Team Challenge program. Thank you for joining us in this effort today, Jean.
Being sensitive to people-centric design. I mean, I like it. Anyways, I think with just the presentations we started off with really, I think, capture kind of what goals this group have, and I want to tell you that tell a little bit about GCTC just to kind of put it in the context. Global Cities Team Challenge was started by our sister agency at the Department of Commerce, which is NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. The idea behind this Global Cities Team Challenge is for teams around the world to try to work on incubation and deployment of kind of replicable and scalable smart cities and communities projects. And from our point of view, that is key to having these interoperable, secure, kind of standards-based solutions that we're trying to work on. And part of the Global Cities Team Challenge is working from the ground up, so that it's not just what do we think, but what have we had now, and what are the issues? So it started with action clusters, groups that will do a project. So for example, the city of Schenectady is working on an integrated system using their light poles and using a lot of data that they have to set up not only various uses, but to come up with new kind of vendor use packages that work for them and hopefully will work for others. They're working with like National Grid, which is one of the biggest vendors in the U.S. for environmental and utility services. So it is kind of like working from the ground up. We also have people working on a whole host of things like San Mateo County, which was working on inclusion, how to make sure everyone is included in the digital world. And so that has been just terrific. And, you know, we could go on and on about that, but we have a number of action clusters that have then formed super clusters where they're trying to do learn from each other's experience and come up with things that can be useful on to the next person. So we're not always reinventing the wheel, that there are ways to move forward easily. And for that, we have developed blueprints. All of the super clusters, and please come to the GCTC website, but the super clusters like transportation, utilities, education, and others have or are working on blueprints. I point the two new ones out, which is on smart agricultural and rural, and another one on smart buildings. And smart buildings also just come out with a new white paper. So I think that what we see is a lot of cross-pollination between these groups. And many of them start out with kind of a, let's discuss the problem and what are we having problems with. And I think Heather and Heidi and Kevin, you brought that to me, which is kind of like how on the state data hubs, you know, how do we make these interoperable? And then because GCTC really focuses also on cities and counties and on how they can interact, cities and counties were involved in the discussion. So we kicked this off with kind of a set of discussions to say, and that would included cities like Coral Gables and Portland. It included, you know, states like Illinois and let's see, well, the ones on this call and many others, and of course the National Governors Association. And we considered this part of a new initiative we had last year, which is for smart states, where we worked with the GCTC, NIST, and NTIA, all worked with the National Governors Association. And this is one of the things that people were working on, which is, you know, one big issue for data and as people get more sophisticated, and as you know, sensing becomes more sophisticated and AI, we learn more about it. It all blends to where we can get to interoperable solutions that have, you know, basically guidelines for them, best practices for them, and standards for them. Now, obviously, all the things that are being worked on aren't ready yet for standards, but they are the ones that need to work. This particular group, which started work on data hubs, had also a lot of industry representatives, both major companies and small companies, to say, so the idea here is kind of multi-sector collaboration. And what was mentioned and what Heather mentioned earlier, Heidi mentioned earlier, was on the whole issue of, you know, how do you make this work, and how do you interoperate? How do you work between, you know, data lakes, data hubs, some new data that you're not even started to collect yet, and how do you govern it? So I think that this is going to be a super way. When we first started, we said, okay, what's the issue? And I think across the states and the cities, they were very clear on what the issues were. So that was good. So the first thing they did was to start a regional cluster, which is kind of all the states and cities that are interested in this topic. And with that, they basically came up with an idea that they should start a nonprofit. Which has now been implemented, and also to kind of look at how do they work on standards that are going to be acceptable to all, and also kind of have that generic capability to be the armored vehicle as anybody would want. But anyway, I think that this group has been particularly successful. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the team leads. Heather, who you know is a great enterprise architect and open government strategist. Tyler Claycamp, who's the director of the State Chief Data Officers Network, and also is a digital fellow at Georgetown University's Beck Center for Social Impact. Heidi Lengdorfer, who's the Chief Data Officer for the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services, Catherine Helms, Chief Data Officer, State of Oregon, and Matthew James Bailey, who's our resident expert and book book author on AI. So I think these groups have just done an amazing amount of work to get us to this forum point and to be looking at the next steps. And I just can't give them kudos enough for their work on this. One of the things that I lead is a smart regions group within GCTC. We have a number of regions, and I just want to talk to you just a little bit about what they're doing. So when you think about your processes, you can say, okay, we have regions that span many states. We have regions that are in a state, various components, but how do the regions fit in? So let me tell you a little bit about some of them. In DC, we have the metro area, and this was started by the Washington Board of Trade. It now, covers many states and it covers many jurisdictions, and they're looking at everything from smart buildings to health, education, and whole host. But their main key is, using the region to make sure it's inclusive, so that you don't lose the folks who are underserved and underrepresented, that you have some equity as you go forward. So, I think those are pieces that, everybody wants to build into their various kind of regional projects, but are very important. Another one is the Great Lake regions, which is just getting started. That one is really working at environmental issues related to the Great Lakes to start with. We have one working on just public safety transportation in Lake Tahoe, California, Nevada areas. So, there's just a lot going on. We have one group that has really made great strides in on data governance. It's the I3 group out of the Los Angeles area. So that's just a quick snapshot, but it does give you, I think, an idea of the breadth of the GCTC team and the volunteers that work on it. They're all amazing people who really have public interest in mind, and also are working on a variety of things that will impact you. And I'm sure they'll be happy to work with you as you go through on your next process. From NTIA's perspective, we work diligently on privacy and cybersecurity through our Office of Policy Development, and we have a lot of work there that I think is appropriate. And I have to say, even on the cybersecurity area, GCTC has an advisory group on that is now working on NIST for standards. So I think there's a lot of work that's could dovetail. And then, of course, we have our international division on our Institute of Science and Technology, which does a great deal of work on many standards of 5G, and also taking a look at best practices and guidelines that might lead later to standards, but where things aren't quite gelled enough for that. So I just want to say that I'm really excited about your projects and this forum, and going forward with OMG and others to make this happen. So all I can say is, you guys keep going. You work really hard, and there's, I think, a great goal.
Next, I'd like to introduce Matthew James Bailey. We are very fortunate to have Matthew on the board of directors for the Open Civic Foundation. He is an internationally recognized pioneer and authority in the fields of innovation, artificial intelligence, smart cities, and the Internet of Things. His leadership is widely acknowledged throughout governments and the private sector. Matthew recently published his first book, Inventing World 3.0, a world-leading guide to ethically aligned artificial intelligence and humankind. Welcome, Matthew.
First of all, I'd like everybody to know that Heather and Heidi have been working on this for a number of years, the OCAF initiative. And it's a very, very important initiative, because as we're moving towards a digital-centric society, having a common set of standards that can be taken and deployed across different regions, not just in the US, but also to other nations, is going to be very important for them to actually move forward in their digital transformation. And it's wonderful that the OMG has supported this, and thank you, Jason, for championing this, because it's a great open standards group to bring this to fruition with other open standards partners. So thank you very, very much. And I know there's going to be a lot of companies coming to the table that will want to get involved in this. So thank you very, very much. So just briefly, let me just go through a few slides. If you just bear with me a tick. Okay, is everybody able to see that?
We are.
Great. Okay. So how do you go through the future of artificial intelligence and AI ethics in 10 minutes? You can't. So I'm just going to put up a few slides. Okay. The first thing is to share with you is yesterday, there was a Smart City AI white paper. There was a collaboration between the EU and the US that was released. And this is called Artificial Intelligence Within Cities. I partnered with the FIWARE, the Open Standards Foundation in the European Union. It has wonderful quotes, guidelines, content, use cases, commentary, and standards from governments, city leaders, innovation AI, private sector. So Cathy from Intel's quoted in there, academia, policymakers, and standard organizations. This is really a fantastic EU-US white paper around artificial intelligence within smart cities, and goes to the heart of how do we create an ethical foundation that aligns society and artificial intelligence into a common platform to move forward with meaning and purpose, to honor the cultures of values, the beliefs and the sovereignty of the citizens, in order for AI to honor that as we move forward. So you can download it from fireware.org. I put a link in chat. You can read, you can get it from aiethics.world or matthewjamesbailey.com. And in there, you'll see the first kind of public explanation of the new Alan Turing-like tests that I invented for measuring the ethical quality of artificial intelligence. And that's all documented in the book. So please do download that white paper. I think you'll find it incredibly useful, and it will play into the smart region and the Open Civic Foundation standard that we're talking about as well. If you'd like to find out how to invent a new world reality between humans and machines, comprehensive guidelines for business, communities, nations, internations, you name it, this is the book to actually read. It's 435 pages. And once again, our friend from Intel, Coty, wrote the foreword, a beautiful foreword. And I was on a meeting this morning very early with the Quad Nations, with ambassadors and others from Japan, Australia, India, and America, discussing how do the 4 countries come together to create a common ethical kind of agreement for them to work on moving AI forward together as a quad country alliance. And there was a lot mentioned out this book this morning. So anyway, you can get it from aiethics.world. So briefly, is artificial intelligence going to destroy humanity, or is it going to liberate us? And of course, you know, we've seen all these wonderful films where Arnie comes back and saves the day, which is great. But actually, artificial intelligence, I believe, can be a guru. This is taken from lots of talks I've done in Pakistan and India in particular, around can AI be a catalyst to help us to leap beyond the challenges that we face today and create a legacy that we can be proud of for future generations to keep moving forward in their human experience and the advancement of humankind, rather being beholden to the kind of environmental and political dogma that we've kind of got entrenched in at the moment, thanks to the industrial age. Just briefly, we're aware that AI is creating wisdom in society. And there's a couple of things here. Most people are familiar with these. I just wanted to call them out. Obviously, AI is being used to beat the world champion in Go, not just once, but 100 consecutive times. And the reason why this is important is not because AI beat the world champion, is because the decision making of artificial intelligence was tested and validated. And that means its decision making can move into other markets in that kind of lightning speed decision and winning kind of decision making, maybe in the industrial sector, maybe in healthcare, certainly in cities. So there's a lot of innovation that can be leveraged into other markets there from that wonderful kind of experience that IBM and Apple put together. Obviously, smart cars and automated vehicles and semi-automated vehicles are going to be popular, and we're probably aware that AI is being used in vision control and all sorts of different types of control so we can read the paper, have a cup of tea, and let the car drive us. The important thing to recognize is that AI is changing how we communicate with the digital world through our voice. And obviously, you know, most of us got Alexa or Siri or other types of voice interacted and enabled devices. And this puts us at rest as we communicate through natural language processing or natural language that we have with the digital world. We don't need to look at our mobile phones or online. We can just speak to Alexa or Siri, and it can then take the actions. And voice interaction is going to be huge in the future of AI. And also, it helps with those that are not familiar with the digital world to be able to navigate the digital world through speech. And that's a really important democratization and participation in an AI-centric future. I put cricket on here because I'm a big fan of cricket. And AI is being used as a third umpire in cricket and many sports. And so we're starting to see AI penetrating within every aspect of our pleasure experience as well. And sometimes it makes great decisions, especially when England win. Sometimes it makes terrible decisions. But we know that AI is not the answer to life, the universe, or everything, to quote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's not 42. Well, I don't think it is. We've seen the films like The Social Dilemma and Coded Bias that say, you know, we need to really consider how ethics are operating in artificial intelligence and the digital world, and to align those with the values of society and the will of the people. And there's been a real mismatch, hasn't there? Particularly around facial recognition and through control of people like Facebook that are controlling narrative and swinging elections in certain states by 300,000 votes. So we know that we need to look at the ethics of how the digital world and artificial intelligence is working, and to make sure that it's doing well in society and doing well for everybody in society. So the OCAF initiative and the Open Civic Foundation initiative is going to be really important, because I believe it will help us to get beyond what I call 1.0 challenges, thanks to the industrial mindset that we face today. So David Attenborough, who you most know, you know, has been on the BBC for 50 years talking about real challenges with our environment and how we're losing the environment and lots of species within that. And that's just a poor reflection of how well we're doing as a global society. And obviously, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals is a reflection back to us in terms of how well are we doing with this industrial mindset, and do we need a new mindset going forward to leap beyond these challenges? And this is simply down to human progress and having, you know, nearly 8 billion people on the planet. And so what role can artificial intelligence have in helping us to be able to not address these challenges, but to leap beyond them? And I think it has a huge role to play. But to the OCF and the OCAF initiative, this is really important, because a lot of these challenges are at the local level: social inequity, social injustice, poor environmental footprint, poor ethical governance of data and other things, poor lack of public trust. I believe that this new Smart Region initiative will solve other challenges as well, as we come together in a standardized multi-stakeholder collaborating ecosystem to create digital-centric services to serve our communities. So I think that the Smart Region initiative is so important, because I think if we address things at the local level and we basically have something that's transplantable across different territories, then we're looking at global change. And that's really, really powerful. And that's really, really a great legacy for the generations to come. And also it's participative, so we get people innovating locally, which is another form of democratizing innovation. At the moment, we're in a three-world split. We have three different approaches to artificial intelligence by the three global superpowers. The EU AI regulation you're aware of has basically brought their cultural values into the classification and certification of AI for all AIs amongst its 27 member states. They have basically determined that the future of the civilization of the European Union will be an ethical centric future where AI is in line with their cultural values. When it comes to the US, they're still discovering their future. We know they have challenges around data privacy, and we're already seeing digital succession from states within the US that are determining their own future with AI and data to align with the values and cultures and diversity of citizens within their state, like Washington State and also California. And then we're also, although the Department of Defense are doing some great things around AI ethics, and China obviously has determined that its own path with 1 billion people, all following a particular agenda from the Prime Minister and the Communist Party, and that's their choice. But what we're heading towards is artificial intelligence splitting towards three different world realities, and it means each different civilization will experience AI differently. Ones that will align with the culture and the values in the EU, in the United States, we yet to discover what they choose. And in China, it's very, very different. So we're heading towards different world realities. And this is why standards are so important. I was speaking about that this morning, and so were many others, is that if democratic countries are to collaborate, then having a common set of values, principles, and ethics that are part of their AI constitution to collaborate together is going to be really, really important, and for them to move forward in a democratic fashion. You're probably all aware, and I'm going to wrap up very quickly, Heidi, but and Heather, you're all aware that we create 2.5 quintillion bytes per day, which is a lot of data, quite frankly, and that's a lot of digital citizens if we listen to what Cotty's talking about. And so we're having all this data. And so there's, in Africa, okay, there's a little bit less data, there's no doubt about that. But in developed countries, there's a lot of data that we can access as part of the OCF and OCAF standard in order to create these digital centric services to serve communities well. Okay, public trust, we can go past that. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of slides here. This is a new form of artificial intelligence. I was speaking to one of the authors of the EU Trustworthy AI white paper, and he's got their group have got a project on explainable democracy, i.e., how do we codify democracy? And he agrees that putting culture and ethics inside artificial intelligence is the future to actually codifying democracy. Culture drives everything. And so in the book, and I talk about new models for ethical or evolutionary AI where its DNA has different cultural principles in there. And that's really important. It can contain cultural principles around what our relationship with is in the planet. So those in the COP agreement will have common values in terms of we need to reduce carbon emissions, but how they do it within their societies and their nations will be slightly different. And so this caters for subtle nuances on how to express that cultural profile. Obviously, macro cultures, tribal cultures, spiritual cultures, community, family, and personal cultures and organization cultures are all different, and they have subtle DNA nuances. So basically be able to encode those with inside artificial intelligence. So when it's deployed in those particular cultures, it knows how to behave. And obviously around our humanity and our sovereignty is really, really important. We don't want to become automatons with the same culture and the same kind of principles. Diversity is what makes the human species really important. And I speak to how to codify humanity and sovereignty into AI. And also how AI is deployed within society. This is really important. Basically, in some contexts that are highly sensitive, like military applications, there'll be a high level of cybersecurity and different types of principles running in order to ensure it does well, it's guarding itself from invasion and being a good digital policeman. When we're looking at smart transportation or smart buildings or smart healthcare, then there'll be a different type of purpose and application framework within the DNA of AI, so it knows how to behave across there. But really what we're looking at is ethics are about unifying our humanity with the digital world in common meaning and purpose. As we look to the future, we're going to see personalized AIs. And you're all aware of probably the Will.i.am digital buddy or his personal digital self. And also Deepak Chopra has jumped on the train and he also has a personalized digital self. And these are very simple digital twins. But as we start to answer the question, is data an extension of our sovereignty, an extension of our human self? As we start to say yes to that, then we start to bring our digital self back into a single place, if you like, of control. And then we can start training personalized AI that understands how our digital self works, starts to actually support the evolution and the activation and the empowerment of the individual within the digital world. And this is what I call a digital buddy or a digital angel or a digital life guru. It's about moving the human species into an advanced self-actualized type of human experience. For those in India, that will be more of a dharmic or a Vedic experience. For those in Western civilizations that have been developed and inherited from the Greek methodology of democracy, it'll be slightly different. It doesn't matter what it is. It's important that it's personalized to the individual, our own personal culture. So where we're at the moment with artificial intelligence, and Professor Stephen Hawking, who you all know, I've had a pleasure of meeting Stephen, wonderful guy, is that this could be the biggest event in human history, but we might need Arnie to come and rescue us, because it could be the end of the human race. So really where we are with artificial intelligence at the moment, and particularly data, is we're taking stock. We're taking a look at basically how do we get ethics within artificial intelligence, and this is being done by most nations around the world in order to get it right, so it's benefiting society and it's taking us forward into an ethical centric AI future. So that's about it. You can check out more at aiethics.world, but that's just a little insight into the future of artificial intelligence and where we're at the moment.
Dr. Smith is the Chief Information Officer of the Object Management Group, as well as the Vice President and Technical Director of the OMG Standards Development Organization. The organization supports communities across a broad set of industries to create, curate, and communicate their best practices through collaboration and open participation. Prior to stepping into this role, his focus has been on applying his research in the field of abstraction theory to engineering principles to create normative semantic systems for human and machine analysis. Welcome, Jason.
Heather and OCF invited me on today to give you a little bit of background on the Object Management Group. Heather and OCF reached out to us a couple of months ago, actually. It's been a little bit of a journey here, but we are absolutely thrilled to be partnering with OCF. This is an incredible opportunity from our perspective, and exactly in the mission of the Object Management Group, or OMG, which is either the best or the worst acronym in history, so depending on your perspective. But invited me on here to give you a little bit of background on what we do and how OCF and OMG are going to be partnering moving forward. So who is OMG? We've been around for 32 years, and we were founded in 1989. We have over 250 technical specifications that are currently in use and openly available, free to the public. About 325 member organizations worldwide, and we work closely with ISO. I'm sure many of you are well aware of who ISO is, the International Standards Organization. We have 13 specifications that are currently ratified as ISO standards. OMG has a special relationship with ISO. We are given essentially we have earned what's more or less a favored nation status with ISO. We are seen as a peer organization with a widely recognized process for producing technical specifications that are of high quality and reflect the best practices of the communities that have come together to form them. So this is a long history and a proven track record, which is fabulous. Just to go a little bit deeper though, the mission of OMG really, it started out in 1989, was to develop technology standards that provide real world value. And we feel very strongly about this. We are not in the business of producing or hosting specifications that don't provide value in the real world to an industry or a community or a society. This is a benefit to the world from our perspective, in that the purpose of these specifications is to promote collaboration, to promote communication, and to make sure that the semantics of data that is shared is well understood on an ontological basis. You've heard that word a few times before today. And that everyone understands exactly what is being shared, how it is being shared, what the context of it is that's being shared. And this is the core of any community. This is the core of any group that is going to come together and work together. Any society, any community must be able to communicate internally in a common way, whether that is a language or a culture. The specifications essentially extend that out into the technical space. So what OCF is looking at doing with OCAF is bringing all of this together in ways that allow the cultural and organizational aspects of society as expressed through government to have a technical expression. And this is exactly what we'd love to see happen. And over the years, it became obvious that what OMG was actually building all these years was not specifications, but communities. So we've expanded out in the recent years. We originally started as simply the OMG Standards Development Organization there in the middle, but in the last few years, we have started building communities and hosting communities for a variety of industry verticals. We have the Industrial Internet Consortium, which focuses on IoT, the Internet of Things, specifically within industrial applications. The DDS Foundation is the Data Distribution Service Foundation. It's a fabric for specifying how data is to be transported and how it is to be interpreted semantically at various points, which probably might have some application here. The Consortium for IT Software Quality, CISC, down there at the bottom, is a longstanding community of ours that produces software metric and architectural metric specifications. The Digital Twin Consortium, top left, is one of our newer ones. It's about a year old. And finally, we have the BPM Plus Healthcare organization coming online now, just spooled up. And it is focused on how to apply the business process modeling ecosystem of specifications to healthcare, specifically how to capture best practice workflows to enable improved patient care and patient outcomes. So we have a wide variety of communities. Each one of these operates more or less independently, and yet they provide this ecosystem. It is a community of communities that come together and interoperate and look for shared common problems that they can work together on and solve. And we have a great deal of back and forth between these communities, as you can expect. So some of our successes, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the technical background. UML, ubiquitous within software engineering, that's one of ours, as well as the systems modeling language, which is used for large-scale engineering. Sysml V2 is currently in draft and is expected to be released later this year. This is an incredibly exciting and major update to the entire system and adds a great deal of semantic context. It's a very nicely done system, and we can't wait to share that with the world. Our meta object facility is a single semantic layer that underlies all of our specifications. This is unique to OMG in that every single one of our technical specifications has a common underlying language. They can all interoperate together. This is really powerful. It really allows you to bring to bear machine understanding and analysis for a wide variety of applications and look at them and work with them and operate with them under a single shared umbrella, shared context and understanding. Corba, the Common Object Request Broker architecture, is one of our earliest ones. It is still operating. It is still being maintained. We feel very strongly that as specifications are brought online, that they become living documents. Corba is pushing 30 years old at this point, and it is still active. We have a group that still takes in issues, and anybody has an enhancement request or a bug that they find, they can file it with that specific team, and they're responsible for making sure that it gets taken care of. Data distribution service I spoke about earlier, and finally the business process modeling notation is how one would go about modeling workflows within a business environment. But as I just mentioned, we're now seeing its applicability within healthcare as well. So this collection of just 6 of our 250 specifications and growing is a very wide-ranging group that covers a vast number of industries, and they can all interoperate together, much as our communities do. So what makes the OMG successful as an SDO? We feel very strongly of the 4 pillars of our community as we are hosting and supporting other technical communities. First of all, well documented. Everything that we do is tracked and traced, and it's been that way since the beginning. We have a complete history of every alteration, every motion, every vote, going back for 3 decades. Finally, it's open. It's an open environment. Any organization, company, or government entity may join. And we encourage everyone to become part of our conversation and the conversations of the communities we are hosting. As I said, we've been doing this for over 30 years. We've been refining this process in great detail, and yet it's never quite finished. We always find new ways of adapting it and adjusting it for the needs of industry. And we listen very closely to our members to make sure that we are doing so. And finally, we have a rather unique situation where we believe in fairness and equity. We operate under a one member, one vote rule, and a member is not a person, a member is an organization. So if you have an IBM, 400,000 global employees, they get one vote. If you have a small single person consultancy, they get one vote. It's the same voting power, regardless of the size of the organization, which means that the specifications must stand or fall on their own merits. It's not a matter of organizational weight, it's a matter of technical excellence. And this has proven time and time again to be exceedingly useful and helps promote the best practices moving forward. So how do we produce these specifications? As I said, just very quickly, it's a very complex, long process. It can take up to about 18 months and many times. However, it's a conversation. And there are two main groups that are involved in this: the public, which is the blue row at the top, our membership, which is the yellow row in the bottom, and finally the output of that is the teal at the bottom of the row there. But it starts with the public. It starts with the market. Market says there's a problem in our industry that we need to solve. Our membership will respond to that. We invite the public to come in, and they provide feedback, and then we'll put out an RFI. What is the problem? What we're doing a request for information. What is the problem that you see out in industry? Once that information is gathered, it forms a set of requirements. Now that we know what the requirements are, our task force authors an RFP, request for proposals, and we're asking for what is the solution. That goes back out into industry. Industry looks at the RFPs, they come up with suggestions for what a possible solution might be. This is the point at which we require public membership to, the public industry members to become members of OMG. This is the point at which we need to make sure that the intellectual property is properly curated and moved into our process, and membership is how we do that. So it comes into our process. The suggested solutions are discussed heavily among the task force members. They may be edited, they may be merged if there are multiple submissions at the same time. And finally, we end up with a beta specification that is then put back out into the public. People can download it, kick the tires, find any bugs that they may encounter, and file it back with us with what we call a finalization task force. And we're checking to see if the solution is robust. Once it's out in the real world, will it survive? Will it be able to take the hits from changes in industry? The finalization task force puts it together. They fix the issues that are raised, and we end up with a 1.0 specification, or for major revisions, a 2.0, 3.0, et cetera. That goes back out into the public now as a full final specification, and again, freely available to anybody who wishes to download it and to operate with it and work with it. There are no licensing fees or download fees associated with any of our specifications. And it now goes into the maintenance phase. And we always start up a revision task force for every specification. So there's a body of experts and subject matter experts and authors of the specification frequently who are ready to react to issues and bug reports that come in. So it's a constant, ongoing process. And at some point, inevitably, the industry says, this is a great solution, but we can do better. And the whole process starts over again. That loop at the bottom takes us back to the beginning, where we start looking at the problem, looking at the solution space, and working with industry partners to bring those specifications to the world. So who can participate? And this is really where we're trying to get the word out that this is a very open process, and it works well with the OCF mission. It works well with the global mission of both OMG and OCF. The public, again, is the blue, the membership is the gold, working our way down. So it's a back and forth conversation throughout the world among industry experts and market practitioners. The request for information, anyone can respond. We encourage that everyone who is interested in a particular problem space respond to an RFI and provide us with the information and give your particular feedback on what the problem is that you see and from your perspective. The task force then requests creates the request for a proposal. That goes back out into the public, and industry can respond to that. The specifications are handled internally, and then it goes back out into the public as the specification, and we have the issues of the bug reports coming in, et cetera. So it's this constant flow back and forth, back and forth. And this is a process that a tremendous number of details under the hood, but this is the basic model. It's a conversation to promote collaboration for a community. And once that community finds a consensus of best practice, we're happy and honored to host their specifications to the world in a way that is open and available to all. So there's an email at the bottom there, info@omg.org. If you have any questions or would like to know more about our process, know more about how you can get involved, please email us at that email address. And we look forward to working with all of you as much as we possibly can. We want to hear your voices and we want to get your input, because this is an incredibly important initiative that OCF is kicking off. And we're excited. This is fantastic. We have a number of task forces dedicated to various industry verticals, such as government, finance, healthcare, retail is another one. They are eager to get going on this. This is exciting stuff. This is the sort of meaty problem that we love to see, and help host and support the community to really chew on and produce the standards and specifications that help lay the groundwork for the next generation. So thank you very much for inviting me on today.
Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Waldinger. Jennifer is the director of the State of Illinois' Health and Human Services Innovation Incubator. The incubator was established to help facilitate more coordinated and collaborative delivery of health and human services programs to Illinois' most vulnerable populations. Its cornerstone initiative is the Illinois Shared Interoperability Platform, which integrates data from disparate services to provide a holistic view of the services and benefits people receive. By leveraging advanced data management solutions such as MDM, the platform will improve the state's capacity to provide more person-centric service delivery and support data-driven decision-making. Welcome, Jennifer.
Appreciate this opportunity to share our interoperability efforts in Illinois. And I'll make it quick because I know that we're short on time, but as you mentioned, I'm the director of the Health and Human Services Innovation Incubator, and we call it HHSI2 because the other name for it is quite a tongue twister. And we're a program office under the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, and we were established to drive innovation and improve the quality and interoperability of data in health and human services in the state of Illinois. And we collaborate with a number of agencies in the health and human services arena, as well as the Department of Innovation and Technology and other agencies to make this happen. And as you mentioned, our Cornerstone Project is the Illinois Shared Interoperability Platform, another tongue twister. So we call it ISIP. And that's funded through a 90% federal match from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We use Informatica Master Data Management, MDM for short, and other Informatica tools to serve as the foundation of ISIP, which will enable agencies to securely access data across disparate sources and provide that holistic view of a person and the services and benefits they receive across the enterprise, which is also known as the golden record. And that interoperability that MDM provides, we hope, will improve the ability of state agencies to work together across those silos that you talk about to provide more person-centered services to those in need. For example, we're working with the Department of Corrections to ensure ex-offenders have the benefits that they need when they are released from a correctional facility to ensure, successful reentry and reduce recidivism. And in terms of efficiency, MDM will also help reduce the need for multiple manual data entries, which will minimize duplicates and errors and increase productivity and reduce waste and fraud. So it will also provide greater capacity for cross-agency data analytics so that we can have more data-driven evidence-based policymaking. For example, we're working with the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development to improve the state's ability to match early childhood data across education and health and human services agencies so that we can better understand the needs of low income and at-risk kids. And know how to more effectively allocate resources to assist them. So when I took on this role in February 2019, many thought Informatica MDM was just something that would be, quote unquote, nice to have, not a priority, not a real necessity. But COVID, as we all know, changed everything. It exposed really how critical interoperability and improved data quality really are, and how important it is for agencies to share data and collaborate seamlessly in times of crisis. After all, life isn't lived in silos, right? So our data shouldn't either. And I stole that quote from another source. So, I just have to note that, but I thought it was a great quote. So, it's not going to happen overnight, but we really need to maximize the value of our data in order to achieve positive outcomes and fulfill our main responsibility as public servants, which is to help improve people's lives and the communities that we serve. And I'm really excited that, OMG and OCF and GCTC, those three teams have joined forces to work on the Open Civic Architectural Framework. I think it's great to have a group of IT and government professionals from around the country leading by example and working together to encourage best practices like data governance and IT standardization and collaboration across, these disparate government entities. Government agencies at all levels are in dire need of this. I know we need it in Illinois, but as we all know, some can be very territorial about their data, and they question the value of data governance and standardization and interoperability because it requires work. And I face those challenges every day in Illinois. A lot of our agencies, well, I shouldn't say a lot of our agencies, but some folks in our agencies are resistant to change and are hesitant to share their data, and understandably so, because we're dealing with very sensitive PII and PHI data. But what they need to understand is that standardization and governance actually helps to ensure the security and appropriate use of that data. And I believe that supporting collective efforts like OCAF can help skeptics see that other states, cities, and feds are adopting these best practices, and hopefully help them better understand the value of interoperability and improve data quality, so we can truly transform health and human services programs and other government programs to be more person-centered and to achieve better outcomes.
As we conclude today, I'd like to leave you with this last impression. We are all in agreement that our government-related data and digital asset management issues are not improving. Government services at all levels in all countries are in need of a solution that streamlines processes for systems transformation and integration, sustainable development, cybersecurity, IT, and data governance. A sustainable, wide-scale solution cannot be implemented without standards. We have the people, the technology, and the initiative to make this happen. The only element we've lacked in the past is collaboration. The group of experts who have presented here today are ready to bring that collaboration to fruition through the further development of the Open Civic Architectural Framework and Open Civic Standards. The OCAF initiative will go beyond the development of a reference architecture to establish a non-proprietary digital ecosystem. The ecosystem is envisioned to result in the reduced cost of government service delivery, increased economic development, and make civic engagement easier and more transparent for the public, while improving public services for a better constituent quality of life. If you've been moved to action through this forum, please follow up by emailing the address on the screen now. I'm looking forward to collaborating, and thanks for joining the Digital Infrastructure Forum.